Corners can be quite a challenge. With single line, you have the ability to change how it handles corners, but with some of the other tools, you need to do it manually. So let's look at different ways to navigate around those corners and get a much cleaner miter and nice clean edge and not have all of those stitches kind of binding up in those corners. So I'm going to digitize just a sharp corner with a single line tool. And that was way bigger than I meant for it. So let's bring this down. And let's do something like a 25. There we go. Width. All right, so this is typically what you can see when you try to navigate stitches around a corner. And when you're dealing with this, you're dealing with a few things that are going to be a little bit problematic. Inside here, you've got a lot of needle penetrations. Now, with short stitches, that helps some, but just look at the number of stitches you've got going through the form that are going to try to sink somewhere inside of there, and that can definitely create some problems, be it thread break or a hole in the garment on the inside of that angle. The other thing that you'll notice, and maybe if I get this into 3D, you can see it somewhat or get a better idea of it. Yeah, kind of right in here. So all throughout here, you're going to have a ton of stitches that start to kind of overlap and bunch up and get really, really heavy. And that can, number one, not feel good. Number two, not look so great on the garment. So how do you deal with stitches like this? My answer is don't let them do that. Don't let them bunch up that way. Don't have it try to navigate around the corner with lots of different stitch angles. Keep the angle of the stitches pretty much the same, and it's going to kind of even out your stitch spacing and give you a much smoother sew out. So how do I do that? I cut this thing up, this corner, I kind of cut it up into multiple pieces. So what does that look like? I will kind of draw a line here-ish. Let's get a thicker mark. There we go. So I've got a line, it's not much thicker, sorry, about here. And I deal with these, one way I deal with it as having this be a cap. So this whole piece having stitch directions like this, and then having my stitch directions come down this way. So that's definitely one way to do it. And then let's move this over and draw it again with another way to do it, and then I will actually digitize it. Another way is I'll bisect this corner as best I can. So I'll have one piece that comes up like this, and another piece that comes down and overlaps a little bit and comes down this way. And that'll give you kind of a mitered corner similar to what you would see in a picture frame. But all of your stitch directions are going to be about the same, and that will cause this area to blend and mesh very, very well, but it will cause the rest of the stitches to be nice and even and not bunch up. So now that I drew all over this, I am going to use my single line as artwork, and I'm going to digitize over it. So let's make this a dark gray so it kind of falls into the background, but we can still see it to digitize over it. And then let me grab, I'm going to use a column 2. You can use a column 1, you can use whatever you want. And I'm going to come up one side. I'm going to come into the middle just a touch. And I'm going to come up the other side, and I'm going to look at where, and actually maybe I'm going to hit escape, and we will use a vector line to kind of draw that cap line where we want it. Now, if you didn't have a vector line, you could use a walk normal to do that. If your level of software didn't have it, you could use walk normal to do that, absolutely, and then just remember to delete it. So now we'll come back in, we'll digitize up here. So this is where everything's going to meet back up, the 3 pieces, 1, 2, 3. So I will start here and I will come to here, hit enter. I will start here and come up, and I'm holding Alt to keep that nice and vertical. I'm going to hold Control and hit Enter because I want it to exit on the inside. Give it a stitch direction. Now let's deal with the cap. You could travel up with a walk stitch if you want. I'm going to move my entry point and move it down. Then we'll deal with the cap. So I'm going to come down to here. I'm going to angle this slightly so we can still have it be a nice point, but not so thin that it won't sew. And I'm going to come down to here, hit Enter, give it a stitch direction. It's starting to get so thin it's not going to sew, so I'm going to bring this down a little bit. There we go. And now I'm going to move my entry point so it will travel and do that piece. And now let's do that last leg. And I'm zooming in using the Shift key. And the scroll wheel on my mouse. Okay. So here is one way to do it. Now let's bring this back and make it blue again. And you can see just from the density of the blue how tight it is in the middle of the one on the left and how smooth it is on the one on the right. In 3D you're going to see it a little bit less, but in the final sew out you would definitely see that. So the one on the right is going to be a much smoother sew out. The one on the left could be a little puckery, could pull your fabric a little bit, could have a hole in the garment on the inside. So let's color this one green. Let's make this one red because, well, we'll make it dark gray again to follow again the background, but it's definitely not what I would prefer. All right, so let's look at the other way to do it, which is that kind of picture frame miter. So I'm going to move this to here and this to here, so I'm going right down kind of the center of that angle. There we go. All right, and then I'm going to grab my column tool. I'm going to use a column 2 again. I'm going to come up, this time I'm going to come past a little bit because I want a little bit of overlap. Hit Enter, then I'm going to do this side. I'm going to go almost to the top, maybe not quite. Those stitches will push. And then let's finish this up going down the other side. And here's the part that I work really hard at, is to get that line somewhere down the middle, get enough of an overlap. And this may take me a sew out or two before I get it perfect. And then come back down, give it a stitch direction. And so let's move my entry point. There we go. So now if I look at this one in 3D, stitches are going almost the same direction, but you get a nice smooth sew out with that kind of mitered picture frame edge. And then the last type of miter would be typically done if you're dealing with a zigzag stitch or a tack down for applique or a tackle twill, something like that. And that is a second style of miter, which is pretty much meant to mimic just the zigzag stitch on a standard sewing machine. So typically with some of that stuff, you would go around the edge of one of those big applique numbers, the tackle tool numbers. You'd have that zigzag, you'd go around the edge, you'd get to a corner, you'd put the needle down, lift your presser foot up, rotate, put your presser foot back down, and sew in the other direction. So there's no mitering, there's no coming to corners, it is just blocked off right angle-ish kind of stitches. So to mimic that, it's done in a much blockier style, and that's with miter. For single line purposes, we would call it a miter style 2. The one that I just did is a miter style 1. And then the green is a cap. So let's grab this. I'm going to change my properties. I'll do it afterwards so you can see the difference. All right, so for that style, I will come up. I like to come up on the inside until I touch the edge. And I'll do the same thing on this side until I touch the till I line up. I'm going to hold Control and hit Enter so I exit on the other side, give myself a stitch direction, and then I'm coming back down the other side. Here to here, and that one I always get wrong and have to edit. That time I did fairly well. And then these typically would be like a zigzag stitch or a tackle stitch, and that also would not have underlay, so I'm going to turn all of that off. There we go. So that's far more common of that style of miter. You might see it a little bit tighter, something like a 17. And then you've got your tie stitches down here is what you're seeing. So you've got, let's do this in purple so that we have different colors. All right, so we've got a cap in the green. So this is a cap. And then a miter style 1. And then a miter style 2. And so that's how you would digitize those manually. If you want to choose them using a single line, you have that option as well. So let me escape out of that, and I will duplicate this, and I will bring this down here, duplicate it again, bring it over, line it up, and we'll do this again using a single line. Now this doing it manually is great when you have things that change width. If you can get away with it with a single line, that's completely fine too. So with a single line, let's do, this is green, and we will right click, go to properties, go into corners, and I'm going to choose cap and hit apply. And that just enabled that. So those look very, very similar. They don't look exactly the same, and that's okay. If, however, you are finding that you don't like how these stitches are fanning, you can change the stitch direction to kind of ease that through. Now, if your stitch direction falls within where the cap is, it's not going to end well for you because it doesn't know how to transition that super slanty stitch direction into that cap. That's not going to end well. So you'll want your stitch directions outside of where that cap or miter will fall, and then I like to clean them up and make them fairly parallel to that. So that's a cap under the corners property, and this is a level dependent feature, so if you don't see it, you may need to take care of that manually with a column 1 or column 2. And then let's go over here to this one. We'll change it to blue. And that was a miter, style 1. And so that one's looking pretty nice. And then, actually, let's just go in and turn off auto. Put that to an edge fill just to clean that up. Just for that bit to make it look a little bit nicer. And then this one, we will turn all of this off because this is not what this corner is typically used for. And under top stitching, I'm going to turn off auto density, and I'm going to change this to a tackle stitch because it's typically a tack down for those kinds of things. And then we will go into corners and we will change it to a miter. However, this time it's a miter 2, which is going to be that squared off look. Now, if the miter is not kicking in often enough for you with this look, you can up this number and it will kick in more often. So then you can, again, kind of mimic that standard sewing machine kind of look. So those are your 3 options. The top I did manually, the bottom we did with the corners property in single line, but now you should be able to navigate through the corners of your design a little bit better with smoother stitching and a really nice sew quality.